In this lecture, I want to talk about one of the major pre-Socratic or early Greek philosophers, Parmenides of Elea. So we could talk about materialist pre-Socratic or early Greek philosophers. These were philosophers who kind of think that reality is ultimately some kind of material stuff, whether it's water or the unlimited or air. Right? So these are materialist pre-Socratics. And same with the Greek atomists. The early Greek atomists are also materialists, right? They think that everything is these little tiny particles. So out of those materialist philosophies, obviously kind of the most sophisticated are Anaximander's idea that the unlimited is what reality ultimately is, and then the atomist's idea that reality is ultimately these little atoms, right? The idea that water or air is what everything's made of is a little less sophisticated than these two. But then there's these other kind of approaches, such as Pythagoras' structuralist theory. I'll call these structuralist as opposed to materialist theories. Pythagoras thought that reality is ultimately number, or that's what makes things real. Here we're not talking about what things are made of, but what is it that allows them to be real? Like what kind of characteristic do things have to have in order to be real? Pythagoras would say number is what allows things to be real. If things are countable, that's what it means for something to be real. It's a countable thing. And so in that sense, it's a number. Right, so again, he's not focusing on any material out of which things are made. He's rather focusing on the structure that things have, and that's what makes them real. Heraclitus and Parmenides, I would class, again, as these structuralist theories. They're not so much focused on the material out of which things are made, although Heraclitus does have some places where he talks like fire is what everything is. But overall, Heraclitus, who's, again, this person who says everything's in flux or changes, he focuses on the structure of things. The structure of them is to change. Parmenides does this as well, but unlike Heraclitus, Parmenides is going to focus on the way that things are not changing, that they're one, and that they're eternal. Now, when you take these two kind of major early Greek philosophers, Heraclitus, Parmenides, I personally think both these philosophers, what they're claiming is true, right? And in other words, both of them have like a key insight to what reality is. Both of them identify and articulate foundational important insights. And so that's, again, I'm a scholar in ancient philosophy, but then I also sort of think, hey, these guys get it right too. And that's my view here. So I want to kind of share what I think the key insight that at least Parmenides has, because it'll help set up what we're going to look at in the more sophisticated kind of theories that we'll see in Plato and Aristotle. So these insights, they aren't sort of solutions to all philosophical problems, rather key insights that then lead to more questions. And those further questions are what philosophers like Plato and Aristotle develop into whole theories about what reality is and how we should live. So Heraclitus' view, everything's in flux, again, is kind of the way people usually talk about him. I mean, this is an oversimplification, but my interpretation would be something along the lines of everything we perceive with the senses is constantly in flux. That's true. Everything you can perceive is constantly changing. Parmenides, again, who is oversimplified claim is everything's being is one, eternal, changeless. My interpretation, again, this is kind of an oversimplified interpretation, but just to give you the basic sense of what I think is going on here. My interpretation is he's pointing out that everything we understand is one, eternal, and changeless. So if you put both these views together, I think you get a foundation for thinking about different levels or aspects of reality. So reality in the sense of these colors, shapes, sounds that we're constantly perceiving, those are all constantly in flux, right? They're constantly changing. The sounds that you're hearing now are, once I even said that, they're gone, right? And you're hearing new sounds. Where the concepts that we understand, like the concept of sound, that concept, especially, I mean, not really just the concept of it, but what sound is, that doesn't change, right? That's something that's changeless, is what I want to suggest. Yeah, I guess another example, one of Heraclitus' famous quotes is, "You can't step in the same river twice." I mean, that's a paraphrase of what he says. But the idea that you can't step in the same river twice. Why? Because it's always changing. But what a river is riverness doesn't change, right? So these ideas, those are kind of the changeless things I think Parmenides is focusing on. But let's get into Parmenides himself to try to unpack what's going on here, like sort of this key insight that I want us to get out of Parmenides. So again, Parmenides writes you a poem. The poem has characters in it. So Parmenides isn't telling you what he thinks directly in his own voice. He's rather giving you this philosophical poem, and you kind of have to work out for yourself what's going on there. And that's kind of what scholars on Parmenides, I'm currently working on an article on Parmenides, and that's kind of what I do and what the scholarly community does. They try to get, well, what, given this poem, like what's the way to make sense of it, and what's the way to make it make the most sense, and what are the key insights that it's offering. So in the poem you have a young man who's carried on a chariot up to the gates of night and day, which in the Greek mythology would be the gates kind of at the edge of the world, either door to the underworld, or maybe it's up into the sky. That depends on kind of the mythology that you're listening to, but whatever it is, the gates of night and day are at the edge of this world that we perceive around us. And once he gets there, a goddess lets him in and speaks to him and reveals to him what she says is the ultimate truth. And as she starts speaking to him, she says, well, we've got two ways of inquiry. We've got two ways that you can kind of pursue the ultimate truth. And these two ways, you can describe them as that a thing is, and that a thing is not being. And what I take it that means is that a thing is something and not nothing. And the other way, so that's the first way. The second way is that a thing is not, and that it must needs not be. And I take it what this means is that the thing is not something, or cannot be something. Now, all this is still pretty abstract. Let's try to get some concrete examples to figure out what this means. So, I take it anything we can conceive or talk about is. That's the sense of being Parmenides is working with. It's a pretty wide sense of being or existence or reality. In the poem, the goddess says this because she says, for the same thing is for thinking as is for being. So anything we can conceptualize is or exists in some sense. And if you think about this isn't that strange, right? I mean, if I have a dream, well, that dream exists as a dream. Or if I have a concept, or if I'm, close my eyes and I picture a horse in my mind, well, that horse in my mind, that image I'm seeing, that exists. It exists as an image, right? It's not out in the world, but it still is like a real thing. So this kind of really wide sense of existence where anything we can talk about at all, conceive of it all, does exist in some way. Maybe it only exists as a dream, maybe it exists out in the real world, maybe it exists as an idea, maybe it exists as a physical thing, right? Those are all different ways of existing, that's fine. But anything we can talk about, think about, exists or is. Now, he's using the word is, or "eina" is the Greek word that correlates to our word in English, is or to be. And he's using that because of how is gets used in sentences. So if I say a unicorn is a unicorn, right? Anything you can say is of is. It's sort of another way to characterize this wide concept of being or existence. So the first way of inquiry is to say that something is, right? So anything we want to talk about, right? That it is. So let's talk about a unicorn, right? A unicorn is. Why? Because a unicorn is a unicorn, right? So a unicorn is something. It's a unicorn. And we can keep on. Well, what else? A unicorn is a one-horned animal that's kind of like a horse. A unicorn is a fictional creature. All these ways that we say is of the unicorn, when we do that, we're describing the way in which the unicorn is or exists, right? So, first of all, a unicorn is a unicorn. It's a fictional creature. It's kind of like a horse's body with one horn and so on. And that would be the first way of inquiry, which, I'll just go back a slide, right? That a thing is and that a thing is not being, right? A unicorn is. It's a unicorn. It's all the things that it is, right? All the properties that it has. Second way of inquiry was that a thing is not and then must needs not be, right? So the second way of inquiry would be saying something like a unicorn is not a unicorn. It is not anything. A unicorn is nothing. Now, when we try to think about these two ways of conceptualizing anything, whether it's a unicorn, whether it's me, whether it's a tree outside, whatever you want to conceptualize, you can kind of plug in there. And what you find is the second way just doesn't work, right? I can't, like, it's almost like the statements are just meaningless in the end. There's nothing there, like when you try to think of it. So, sure, I can conceptualize a unicorn is a unicorn. A unicorn's a fictional creature. That's true. A unicorn is a unicorn. That's true. A unicorn is a horse-like fictional creature with a horn. That's true. I know what you're saying. But if you start saying a unicorn is not a unicorn, I don't know what you're saying. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Or a unicorn is not anything. Well, wait, it's not even a fictional creature. It's not anything. It's not even a thing that humans have dreamed up. It's not anything at all. What do you mean? Like, I can't really conceptualize something at all that's not anything. A unicorn is nothing. Like, just absolute nothingness. Like, I can't even get that concept in my mind. And that's kind of what Parmenides is driving at, I take it, in the poem, is that when we just try to think of things, certain things that you can think of, you can conceptualize them, like even things like a unicorn, like any of the things we perceive around those we can all think of, we can conceive. But then there's kind of there's a limit to this. I can't conceive a square circle, for instance, like a circle that's also a square. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. I can't conceive pure nothingness, like not just empty space, but pure. It's not space. It's not empty. It's not anything, right? Like, can you get pure nothingness? I try to think of that and I can't. Right, and that's, precisely what it means to say unicorn is not anything. No, I can't think of something that's not anything, right? I can think of things that don't exist in the world around us, sure. I can think of things that I, can't see out there in space. But something that's not anything, that's not even a fictional creature or image that I have in my mind, right? I can't conceptualize that. And so what the goddess does in the poem is say, okay, well then really all that's left for us is this first way, where we've got to recognize that things are. And they are in different ways, but they are, right? And this second way of trying to go just doesn't work. And so we're left with the fact that anything that you can conceptualize, that you can say is of, that you can say that it is something, that exists and is. Right, and why you can't go down that second way, to use the words out of the poem, the goddess says, for you can neither know what is not, for it is impossible, nor speak of it. All right, by what is not, she means complete nothingness. And she says you can't know that, you can't even speak of it. You can't know what's not because you can't conceptualize it. You can't speak of it because every time you speak of something, you explicitly use the word is, right? So if I say, hey, there is nothingness, well, I'm saying nothingness is something, but then it's not really pure nothingness. Right? So if we speak, our words always identify something. But if we've identified something, that thing is not pure nothingness or pure what is not. Okay, so if we're left in the first route, let me just go back a slide. This first way is talking about being, right? It's something that is. And so being, that's what is being. And so what is this being? What is this stuff that is? Right? What is existence or reality in this wide sense where anything we can think of or conceive is real in some way? What is this? And what I want to suggest is that being is truth. Because that's really what we're kind of getting at here. Right? We're getting at a unicorn. It's not a being in the sense that it's a thing out there in the world that we perceive. Right? I can't, it's a fictional creature. But I can still say is of it, I can still conceptualize it because it's still something that's true, meaning it's something that we can say true things about, and that we can have true opinions about, right? A unicorn is a fictional creature. That's a true thing I can say about a unicorn. And so a unicorn has being, or it is a being, because it's something true. And so being, any being, is a truth, and being itself is truth in this sense, right? So this is another concept. We looked at these different views of what is reality ultimately, and I think Parmenides' answer to that, or the goddess in the poem's answer to that, is that reality is truth. Why? Because truth is what we're always talking about and what we're always conceptualizing, right? Whenever we talk about anything, we're talking about something that's true in a way. Even when we say false things, we're talking about truth. So what does that mean? Let me give some concrete examples. If I say, hey, a unicorn is standing in this room here. I'm giving this lecture and there's a unicorn right over here off the screen. You can't see it. If I were to say that, I'm saying something false, but I'm talking about a unicorn. I'm talking about something that truly could stand in fictional rooms. The falsehood is not in the thing that I'm talking about. It's not in the unicorn, right? The unicorn is a true thing. Something that truly is a fictional creature and truly could stand in a fictional room. Meaning, if I tell a story, I can be like, oh, in that room there was a unicorn. This is a fictional story. Yeah, that's fine. Like, unicorns can be in fictional rooms because they're fictional creatures. The falsehood is that I'm saying that unicorn is standing in this real room, right? That's where the falsehood's coming in. But the unicorn itself is a being. It's something that true things can be said of, and so is something true in itself. Even though it's false that it's in this room. But that's only because this room is not a fictional room, it's a real room. So why call truth in this sense being? Again, that's because whenever we say is, we're claiming that something is true. And being is just a form of the word is, right? That's the same word, actually. Anything that is a being, right? To be is to be something you can say is of. So I'm a human. A unicorn is in this room. We're saying is, or the verb to be, right? So am is a form of that verb. I say I am a human. This unicorn is in this room. That's why Parmenides wants to call this being. Now you might ask, well, wait a minute. How can we know that there even is an absolute objective truth or being? Because that's kind of what it sounds like Parmenides is talking about. He's saying there's this absolute being that's there, even if we're not thinking about it. It's kind of this absolute truth. How can we be certain that there is an absolute truth? Well, again, he does think that, right? And here's how you can be certain that there's an absolute truth or being that we can know, that we can talk about, that we can conceptualize. Let's go back to these two ways of inquiry. That a thing is, right? So that a thing is something, that a thing is not. Seeing how to do this with a unicorn, right? So first way of inquiry would be assume that a unicorn, is a fictional creature, is whatever else you can say true about it. The second way would be a unicorn is not a unicorn is not anything, a unicorn is nothing at all, and that second way doesn't work. Right? Because I just can't conceptualize what's going on in that second way. A unicorn is not what does that mean to say that? A unicorn is not anything at all, not even a fictional creature? What does that mean? So the second way just doesn't work. I can't conceptualize it, I can't even think that. I can't really even say it. Because if I've already said a unicorn, I've talked about something. And so it's just always false to say that it was nothing. But we can do the same thing with absolute truth or being, right? A totally objective being, reality that's just there, this reality, this truth that's absolute and that's there whether we think about it or not. Right? So think about it this way. The first way of inquiry, assume that there is an absolute objective reality, being, or truth. Second way, assume that there is not an absolute being, objective reality, or truth. But what we find is the second way just doesn't work again. Why? Because the second way of trying to think about things is impossible. Because by trying to assume that there's not an absolute truth, you assume that it's absolutely true that there's not an absolute truth, right? So if you're going to tell me, hey, there's no absolute truth, you're saying it's absolutely true that there's no absolute truth, right? You're saying it's true that there's no absolute truth, which just means it's true that there is no truth, right? If we want to just simplify it by taking the word absolute out. But you can't say that it's true that there's no truth. Parmenides is saying at least that, yeah, there's no way to imagine, like, you just can't think that there's no absolute truth. You can trick yourself, you can say the words, there's no absolute truth, but that doesn't make any sense, because when you make a statement, there is no absolute truth, you're claiming that that statement is true. Okay, so that's why Parmenides thinks that we're stuck with the first way of inquiry. We've got to assume that there is an absolute objective reality, being, or truth. We've got to assume that. And why? Because we can't even imagine or conceive or talk about the other possibility. So let's just be honest with ourselves and say we're always assuming that there's an absolute objective truth or reality. And what are the characteristics? Okay, well, wait. It's all pretty abstract. Like, what, and it's still going to be abstract, but I mean, let's try to get a little bit more concrete. What are the characteristics of this being or truth? Like, what are we even talking about? And so in Fragment 8 of the poem, the goddess goes through some characteristics. She says it's one. And why would it be one? Because you can't conceive of anything that's not one thing. Right? So the idea here is, if we're talking about something, if we're thinking about something, then it's one thing already. So let's just be honest about that. Let's be explicit about that. If I'm talking about something, it's one thing. And so this being or truth that I'm talking about, whatever it is, right, whatever thing I'm talking about that I'm claiming is a thing, it's one thing. Okay, so what are the characteristics of this being or truth? Well, we just said it's one. It's also complete. It lacks nothing of what it is. So anything I can talk about, literally anything, whether it's, say it's my hair, right? I'm talking about my hair. Well, my hair just is my hair. And, if I specify, well, I'm talking about my hair right now, all its properties are all its properties, right? It lacks none of its properties. And so any being, again, anything we can actually conceptualize, that's true. Once we specify what we're talking about, it's got a certain set of properties and can't lack those. So it lacks nothing of what it is, because what it is all its properties or characteristics. So this goddess also says that being is unique. It's not the same as anything else. Again, that's true. I'm not the same as you. You're not the same as me. This chair that I'm sitting in is not the same as any other chair. And anything, literally anything we can talk about. This dream I had last night is not the same as any other dream I've ever had. Right? Anything we can talk about at all is going to be unique. Let's go to some other things. What is being or truth? Well, if we kind of go off of what we've said here, what we mean by being or truth is anything that can be understood. Right? Anything that we can understand, can conceptualize, that's what being or truth is. Right? Whatever is intelligible, where intelligible is a kind of another way of saying whatever can be understood. And that's kind of a more technical philosophical term. I might use it sometimes, so I just want to put that here so you know what that means. Right, so anything intelligible is what being or truth is. And what can be understood? Well, you would say, well, ideas are what can be understood, right? I understand ideas. And the weird thing is that in Parmenides' view, and I take it this follows from what the kind of argument he's given, these would be ideas that they would be there even if there were no minds like ours to understand them. Or think of another way to what can be understood as a kind of thing plus a set of attributes. And that's what can be understood, is kinds or ideas, but objective ideas, meaning ideas that would be there even if no one was there to understand them. So to try to kind of wrap your mind around this a little bit, think of something like a rock before humans came into being, right? Before we evolved or were created, right? However you want to think about that. And before there were other beings that could think, just do it before there's even living beings, right? And there's rocks still. Well, those rocks are still rocks. They're still, each one of them is still one thing. Two of them together is two things. Right? So those ideas of one and two, those are there even if there's no one to think about them, right? Before there's humans, if you have two rocks, there's still two rocks, right? You got one rock and another rock, that's two rocks. Even if there's no humans to say that, use the words to, or to kind of, think that, it's still true, right? And that's, we're talking about being or truth. It's still true that even if all humans and all rational beings and all living beings died out, all beings that could think died out, there'd still be, in this universe, there'd still be rocks, and there'd still be, 2, 3, right? You still say, like, that's one rock, that's another. Like, there'd be no one there to say that, but it would still be true that there are rocks left over once all the humans and all the other living beings die. And so those ideas of, like, oneness, two-ness, rockness, that's what I mean by saying that what can be understood as an idea. Right? It's an idea, not in the sense of a concept, but as something that's like something true, that's true even when there's no one there to understand it as true. Right? Or at least no humans there or no other beings like us there to understand it. So what are the characteristics of being or truth? It's one, it's complete, it's unique, right? This goes for any being. She goes further to say it's unmoved, which means unchanged and unchanging. And this is what Parmenides is sort of famous for claiming that being never changes. And I want to say, yeah, he's right about this if you think of it in the right way, right? Whatever can be understood never changes. 1 + 1 is 2. That's something we can understand, and that never changes. Even if all humans and all rational beings were to die out, 1 + 1 is still going to be 2. Right? One rock and another rock is still going to be 2 rocks. So those truths, the things that we can understand, never change. Think of another example as a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Right? What a Tyrannosaurus Rex is, even though they're all extinct now, what one of those is never changes. Right? What a Tyrannosaurus Rex is, unchanging. We can understand what it is now, even though there haven't been any around here on Earth for a long time. We can still understand what they are, and they never change. Now, let's take it a little bit more up to date, right? So those examples, okay, fine, but what I am right now never changes, right? So the fact that right now I'm a professor, recording a video lecture, that's always true, right? That's never going to change. And so that, again, when we're thinking of reality as truth, that truth never changes. That, hey, at this day, this time, I recorded this lecture. That's always true. It's always going to be true. And here's another thing that's always true and never changes. That it's possible for me either to die or not to die today. Right? And so that truth of those possibilities, those are always true. Right? It's possible that I die today, and it's possible that I don't die today. That's always true. And so when we start to think about things this way, we see, hey, there's a bunch of these unchanging truths here that we're constantly relying on. We constantly realize this, right? I hope all this I'm doing here is just kind of unpacking things you already thought and trying to get clear and explicit about them. Okay, so let's keep on building with what the God is saying. She says, being or truth in this sense is one, it's complete, it's unique, it's unmoved, which means it's unchanging. It always is, no beginning, no end. Okay, well, how is that right? So here's how I want to defend this. So yeah, it is always true that my birth is one of the possible things that could happen in some universe. And so I want to say that's true before our universe even came into being. It was always true that it was possible for it to come into being, and it was always true that it was possible for me to be born in some possible universe that could have come into being. Right? So I know this is kind of like a weird thing to think of, but yeah, all these, if we think about possibilities, it's possible that the universe came into existence or not. That's always true. That possibility is always true. The possibility that a different universe could have come into existence than the one that actually did is true. Right? And so in that sense, what we're talking about here, these truths, they have no beginning, they have no end. They always are. For all of time before it happens, my birth is a possibility. And now it's a possibility. It's a possibility that's happened, but it's still possible, right? So it's possible that I was born. That was true before it happened. It's true now, and it will be true for all time after it happened, right? It's always possible that I'm born. It's always possible that I'm giving this lecture right now. That's all always true. Okay, so again, going back, I know this is kind of cycling through, but hopefully as I'm circling around back again, things are starting to make more sense. What is being or truth? Everything that can be understood, whatever's intelligible. And this includes everything that are in our universe that has been, is now, or will be, when you consider that thing as something that's possibility, as something that's possible. Everything that could be, meaning anything that's possible in any possible universe, that's included here in this being or truth, right? Things that we can think about and we can talk about. All mathematical truths, obviously. All possible fictional beings, and so on and so forth, right? Anything you can possibly conceptualize, talk about, say true things about is a truth, right? Is true. If you can say truth about it, it's true. And if you can say truth about it, it's being, or it is a being. And so that's what being a reality is on Parmenides' view, and I think that's the key insight that he has.